Hello folks. So in this video I want to add in some scrolling so the player can actually get to the edge of the screen and then the whole map moves and scrolls along. But before I get into that, the background is still this kind of green pastel color that I filled it with to start with. I want to use proper background images for it instead. And that's what I'm going to do first. And to do that, I just need to load them in. So I'll come up to this section here just underneath my variables where I've got my load images area. And I'm just going to start loading them in one by one. So I'll copy this code from the bullet and just rename it a little bit. So the first image is Pine1. So the location for them is background / pine1.png. Now you may have saved these in a different file or folder, so just update this to match wherever you've saved your files. The next one is Pine2, so we just change the number. Then I've got one called Mountain, so we change these to Mountain. And then the last image is the sky. So I changed this to sky, but the actual name of it is sky_cloud. So these images I downloaded as part of a background asset pack. So I'll put a link to that in the description. Now remember, the actual background is drawn with this drawBG function. At the moment, it's only got that one line which fills it with that pastel green color. So to add in more of these images, I just need to blit them in here. So we used that already before. It's just screen.blit, and then you start off with the images. So what I want to do is draw the images in reverse order from furthest away to closest to the player. The first one is going to be sky_img because that's going to be the first image, and the location for that is going to be 0, 0, so it draws it in the top left corner. So there you go, you can see now the sky is coming in. It's not actually as tall as the screen, so the green pastel color is still underneath it, but I'm going to fill in with the rest of the images now. The next one is going to be the mountain. Say screen.blit, and this time it's mountain img. And the x-coordinate is still 0, but the y-coordinate is going to be different. Instead of drawing him from the top, I'm going to draw these from the bottom. So to work out the position for it, I first of all take the screen height to get me all the way to the bottom of the screen. I take away the height of that particular image, so it's just get_height. And then I just offset it up the way by 300 pixels. If I run this again, you can see now the mountain is drawn up here, kind of layered over the sky. I still have these images or the spaces underneath that I need to continue to fill in. The next one then is going to be screen.blit, and this is pine1_img. And then I repeat that process. And in fact, I'm just going to copy this and put it in here. So the x-coordinate is still 0, y-coordinate is now changed to pine1 get height. And then lastly, I'm not going to offset it as much, so I'll offset it by 150 pixels. So now you can see it's kind of starting to fill in. I've got these darker pines. So the last one is just the green pines that I'm going to put over it. And because I'm building these up from the bottom, the last one is just going to fill in this green pastel. So copy this down, put that one on as well, and this one is going to be pine2png. Change the height one here, and then I don't offset this at all. I just want this to sit right at the bottom of the screen and just fill everything in nicely. So there you go, that's it. I've now got a background here, and actually as I walk, the background is going to be part of the scrolling. So it's not going to be just the level and the enemies, the background will also scroll. Now to add in the scrolling, there are a few variables that I need to define first of all. I'll come up into my define game variables section, and I'll start off. So the first one I want is a threshold. So this is going to be called scroll_thresh. And I'll set this to say 200 pixels to start with, and I can play around with it. Basically, this threshold is the distance that the player can get to the edge of the screen before it starts to scroll. So I don't want him to actually go all the way to the end of the screen. I want it to kind of detect that he's getting close, and this is the limit for that. So when he gets within 200 pixels of the edge on either the left and right side, then the screen is going to move. So that's one defined. Now the other one I'm going to do underneath here because I'm kind of keeping my constant variables separate. So I want screen_scroll. This wants to be set to 0, and then BG scroll. And I'll explain why I need two of them. This was going to be the main one. Now with these variables defined, I can start actually setting them to something. And because the scrolling is going to be controlled by the player's movement, it means that I can do all of that within the move method. First of all, I want to define a specific local variable within here. I'm just going to give it the same name. So I'll say that is 0 as well. And then the actual variable itself is going to be controlled based on the player's position. So right at the bottom of the move method, I have this bit here that updates the player's position based on the dx and the dy values. So what I want to do is update scroll based on player position, and I'm just going to do a couple of checks here. Well, the first one is that I want to know which of the, because remember this soldier class applies to all of the instances, so I don't want this move method to also be triggered by the enemies moving back and forth and maybe getting to the edge of the screen. I want this to only be controlled by the player. That's going to be my first check. If self.char_type is the player, only then am I interested in this class's position. And the check here is quite straightforward. I want to know if the player has gone off or has gone quite close to the right-hand side of the screen. If self.rect.right, i.e. the right-hand side of the player, is greater than screen width minus that scroll threshold that I defined earlier. So if he's getting close to that limit, or sorry, if he is within that limit, then we need to start scrolling. The other alternative is, or he could be going to the left-hand side, in which case it's self.rect.left is less than, well, it's just scroll thresh, because the left-hand side is always 0. If either of these conditions are met, well, how is this scrolling actually going to work? Normally, when the player is running around, in fact, I'll just comment this out to show you. When the player is running around, everything else is stationary. It's the player that's moving relative to the screen. However, when you get to the edge of the screen, what I want to happen is the player will stay stationary relative to the game window, but everything else in the background is what moves. So that means that when he gets to this position, I want to make sure that he doesn't keep moving, because then it's going to kind of negate the point. He's going to keep moving while the screen scrolls backwards. So that's not how this works. He needs to stay where he is. So to do that, I need to make sure that I actually move him back. So here he's just been moved to this new position, and then as he's done that, the new position has triggered the fact that he's at this edge of the screen. So let's move him back. Self.rect.x is just reversed. So we take away that dx value that has just been applied to him. But now the screen itself, so this screen scroll variable, well, that just becomes equal to the speed of the player. So this dx is showing how quickly the player is moving. But if we want to scroll everything and keep the player stationary, then we just want to scroll everything in the opposite direction to where the player was moving. So if he's moving to the right-hand side, i.e. dx is positive, then we want the screen to move to the left-hand side. So I need to invert that. I need to say that whatever dx is, I want the screen to scroll by the negative version of that. So if this is a positive value, i.e. he's moving to the right, the screen moves left. If this is a negative value to start with and he's moving to the left, well, then having this minus here gives me two negatives, i.e. this turns into a positive, the screen moves right. Now with this done, I now have a screen scroll variable, but it's a local variable that's contained within this method and this class. So I need to return it back into my game. So down here, I'll add return screen scroll. And what this means is now this method, this move method, has a variable that it returns. So if I go into my main game loop and I find the player.move function, so where is this being called? Right down here, player.move is being called. So now I can actually take something back from it. So I can take screen scroll. Remember, I've defined this at the start of the game in my variable section as 0. So now I'm going to be getting a value back. And this value is always just going to be either minus or plus whatever the player's speed is, because that's what dx is. And I can test this. I can just type print screen scroll. And if I try and move, so it's 0 to start with, but if I get to the edge of the screen, oh, okay, I'm too close to the wall here. If I try and go to the right-hand side, there you go. As soon as I get to this point, I'm getting a value of -5, because what that's basically saying, and notice the player is no longer moving. So what this is kind of saying is that the player is going to stay in this position, but everything else should be shifting over by 5 pixels to the left-hand side, because this is negative. And that's going to give the impression of everything scrolling, but it's going to look like the player is just continuing to walk. So now this bit is going to be a little bit tedious. Basically, all I need to do is take this variable and feed it into all of the draw methods that I've defined so far, so that all of those individual blits that I've got and all of those rectangles, all of them get shifted by the same amount. So the first one I want to deal with is the world itself. I want to make sure that the entire world shifts across. Well, my world class, if I scroll all the way back up here, my world class has a draw method, and all it's doing is just drawing each individual tile based on the rectangle position of that tile. Now, what I could do is simply change where they are blitted. So I could just change the x coordinate of where I'm showing the stuff. But the problem is that I need to move the rectangles themselves, because remember, rectangles are what is controlling the collision. So if I just move everything visually, then the rectangles will stay where they are. So I will be colliding with things that have already shifted. So what I need to do instead is offset every single one of these rectangles within the world tile list. So I'm actually moving everything across, not just showing the images, but moving the underlying rectangles. Well, here I'm already iterating through them anyway to blit them onto the screen. So before I blit them, I'm just going to change their x value. Now remember, this tile variable here is a tuple, and it contains at index 0 the image of the tile, and at index 1 the rectangle. So I can access that rectangle. I can say tile 1. That gives me the rectangle, which in itself contains a number of properties. And at index 0, that property is the x coordinate. So I can just say, let's add on the screen scroll variable. So if I run this code now, and I run over to where my threshold initially was, you can see everything is now starting to scroll. Well, I say everything, but actually it's just the world. Everything else is still stuck where it was on the screen because I haven't added that functionality in for it. So that dude is now stuck in between those two spaces. But you notice the collision is still working. So because I'm moving the actual rectangles, I'm able to still interact with this world map. I'm able to jump around and kind of collide with everything, jump on the platforms. So what I need to do next is to add in the same functionality for all these other items. And that's easy enough. Everything else, or most of the main items, have been created as classes. So I just need to create draw methods for them. So I'll start at the top and work my way down. Now the first one that I need to take care of is the actual other enemies, the AI. So the AI is controlled within this method here. So if I just come right down to the bottom, I can add an extra little line in here. And all that is just going to be scroll. And I say self.rect.x, because remember, all I'm doing with this variable now is just shifting all of the rectangles x coordinates over by screen scroll. So that's going to move the players. So now let's run across. And if I move, you see now the enemies are also scrolling. So they're kind of staying where they are relative to everything else. They're keeping their position on the screen. So that's them done. And if I scroll down, I've already done the draw method for the world class. Now I just need to start adding in for my additional classes. So, and here in the decorations class, I just add in def draw. No, actually, I'll call this update. Update self. It doesn't need any other arguments. Doesn't really need much at all. Just exactly the same thing again. We increase by screen scroll. So now, if I run this, all of my decorations in theory should stay where they are, and they do. So all of that is now moving across as well. So that's starting to come together. And I'm going to copy this because I can just copy this and paste this into most of the other classes. So let's go down, and next one is water. I'll add the same thing in here. Don't need to really change anything. And you'll be able to see now where that water was. When I run across, this little cavern over here was supposed to be filled with water. So now that's staying in place as well. Next one is the exit. Now you won't be able to see this one work because that's right at the end, so I'm not going to bother demonstrating that. And then after that, it's the item box. Well, that already has an update method, so right at the start, I will just say scroll, and I'll paste that in, but I'll remove this def section because all I need is just to move them across. And if I run this again, well, I'm not sure if I had item boxes at the start, but I should have them. Yeah, there we go. So we do have some item boxes going along, and all of them are scrolling as well. So that kind of looks like everything is done. However, there's a couple of things that are not instantly visible, and those are the bullets and the grenades. So if I'm running and I start to shoot, they fly really quickly in this. Oops, I died. They fly really quickly in one direction, but they're going to fly slowly in the other direction. And that's because they also need to be updated. Everything else needs to move. So whenever the player is scrolling the screen, everything has to move. So let's come down to the bullets class here. I've got my update method, and it already has a move section here. So it's moving by the direction multiplied by the speed. So I just need to add on the end, also include the scroll. So scroll. And now just to take care of the last one is grenades. That's got a more complicated update method. So we just add right at the end here where we're changing the rectangle position. Let's add in screen scroll. So that's nearly everything, but there is one more bit that I've still missed. If I throw a grenade and I keep running, notice the explosion still moved. So it's little things like that that are easy to miss because they're not always visible. So I need to do the same thing again for my explosion. It's got an update method anyway, so we'll just add a little bit here. Copy that, delete this, oops, go back up. Explosion, so it was in here. The update method, I just need to delete this because it already has one. Add a comment to say scroll, and that should be that working as well. And that's it. So now everything should be scrolling completely with the player moving. So now I could run all the way to the end of the game and get to that little exit sign at the final stage. But you notice the background is still stationary. And that's something that I want to address. I think it looks much better when the background is also scrolling. So that's quite straightforward to add. Remember, I did separate my variables. I had one for screen scroll and then one for BG scroll. So that's what I'm going to control them in here. Now the difference between the two variables is that this one, screen scroll, is always going to be equal to the player's speed. So it never actually builds up. Whereas BG scroll is a cumulative value. So I want this to pretty much just track overall how far the player how far the screen has scrolled. So we keep track of it within here. And one of the reasons I have this is because this value allows me to permanently move the rectangles, whereas this value is going to allow me to reposition the images on the screen. So they both do need different types of inputs, because the rectangles will only move by a small fixed amount, while the background, because it's being blitted, it needs to know the full amount of offset. And basically all I'm going to do here within this drawBG function is include the scroll, or the BG scroll, within this position. So at the moment they're just positioned based on the X value being 0. Well, I'm just going to say 0 minus BG scroll. And I'm going to add this for all of them. So I'll put that in all of the X coordinates. If I run this now, there will be a pretty obvious issue. So if I run this along, everything starts to scroll, and eventually I get to the end of that image. So what I actually need to do is make sure that I've got another image or another set of these images coming in right after. So it's going to give me the impression that it's just a continuous background that's pretty much infinite, but actually it's just the same images repeated over and over. Well, for anything that's going to be repeating like that, I use a for loop. So just underneath this screen fill BG, because I don't need that to be repeated, I add in a for loop. And I'll say for X in range, and within this range, you can choose any number. So I'm going to pick 5, meaning that I want this to be iterated and to be shown 5 times or 4 times or whatever. You can just change this to whatever you need it to be. So we indent all of this, and now I just need to start changing this variable here. So the X value, I actually want to change depending on this X in the iteration. And what I want to do instead here is multiply that X value by the width of a particular image. So for example, if this sky image is 100 pixels wide, then the first one is just going to be still at 0, but the second one would be at 1 times 100, then the next one will be at 2 times 100, and so on, and they're just going to stack up next to each other. That means that first of all, I need to know how wide these images are. And before I get into the loop, I say width equals sky underscore image dot get width. I think that is the shortest image. I'm not sure if they're actually all the same or not, but this is the shortest one anyway because this is going to work in terms of keeping them all uniform. So now I replace this 0 with a set of parentheses and I set x multiplied by the width. So now I need to copy this down, replace all of my zeros with it. And if I run this again, as I start to scroll over, well, it's not going to be obvious actually. You'll not be able to see when it changes because the way this background is set up is that it is continuous. So the left hand side and the right hand side of each image, they kind of marry up, meaning that if you stack them next to each other like this, it just keeps scrolling. So it looks like it's the same image, but actually we're probably on like the 3rd or the 4th image by now. And this is fine, it's all looking good, but it's all a little bit stationary. You see, they're all moving together. And what I would like to do is add in parallax scrolling. Basically have them scroll at different speeds depending on how far away they are from the player. And that's what would happen in real life anyway. If things that are further away, they're going to look stationary. Things that are closer to you, they're going to look like they're moving. And that is quite straightforward to add. I just need to add a little multiplier. So here, rather than just automatically moving everything by the same variable bg scroll, I'm going to scale that depending on how far away things are. So the sky is the furthest away, so I'll actually half it, so I'll say times by 0.5. Then the mountains will be times 0.6. Down here, the pines that are a little bit closer are 0.7, but then the ones that are closer still are 0.8. And now if I run across, as soon as I start scrolling, you notice that there is a difference in the speed of everything. And it actually gives you an impression of some kind of depth to this. It makes it a little bit 3D in the sense that things look like they're moving past each other. So you can actually get an understanding that these trees are closer to you and the mountains are further away, in the sky still you can see it's kind of like the clouds are poking out from behind the mountain peaks. So that's all working really well now, but you will have noticed a bit of a bug here. When I get to the end of the screen, the scrolling doesn't stop. That's because it doesn't know that it needs to stop. So what I actually want to do is keep track of how far the whole thing scrolled, and when I get to the end of my map, I want it to stop being able to scroll so that the player can just run to the edge. And that's easy enough to add because I know how far I'm scrolling. I have a variable called bgscroll that tracks that for me. So it's either 0 right at the beginning, or it's a maximum value when I get over to the right hand side. Now to work out this maximum value, I need to know how wide and basically how long my level is. Now if I go down into my world class, where I'm processing my data, I'm taking that world data list into it. So I can extract the length of it from here. I can assign a new variable called self.level_length, and I can set it to the length of that list. So to get the length of anything in Python, there is a len function. So whatever I put in here, as long as it has a length, it's going to tell me how long it is. Now this list, remember, is a list of lists. So that data is going to give me, if I put it in here, it's going to give me an overall list that contains a whole bunch of individual rows, and each row has got a certain number of columns. So what I need to know is how many columns there are. Now all the rows have the same number of columns, so it doesn't matter which one I pick. So I'm just going to pick the first one, which is at index 0. So that's going to say how many columns, i.e. across the way to the right hand side, how many tiles going right do we have within any given row, in this case the first row. So that's going to give me an information on how wide my level is, or how long the level is. And now the next bit is I go back to where my scrolling code is within the move method, which is right up here, and I need to add in quite a few more checks here. So I need to split these two up. At the moment, what I'm doing is I'm saying if I've moved off to the right hand side of the screen or the left hand side of the screen, I kind of need to add a little bit more complexity to them. So I'll put brackets around the first one so that scrolling to the right does not just depend on this. I need an additional check. And this check is going to be against this background scroll. I need to make sure that my bg scroll, which is that cumulative total value of how much I've scrolled over, is less than the entire width of my game window, including the whole world map. Well, the whole world map, I know how many columns it has because I've just gotten that value, so world.level_length. But of course, these are just individual indices, so it's going to give me a number of 150 because I know that's how many columns I have. But I need to turn that into pixels, so I multiply it by the tile size. And lastly, that gives me the entire width of basically the whole map, but I do have a game window on its own, so I need to take that away from this. So minus screen width. I know this maybe is a little bit complicated what's going on here. The best thing is probably just to play around with these numbers. To be honest, it took me quite a while to figure this out in the first place. It was quite a bit of trial and error. So what I do at the end there, because this line is getting very long, I wanted to split it. So I just add a backslash just before the or and split it onto the new line. So in Python, that allows me to split that same line of code over two lines, or more than one. So it knows that this is a continuation. It's not going to take this as an indented part of the if statement. It's a continuation of the previous line because there's a backslash there. And now this section also needs a little bit more checks added to it. So I put brackets in and then I add the additional check. But in this case, the check is easier. I'm going to the left-hand side. So again, I need to check my bg scroll. But in this case, the bg scroll should already be pretty much at 0. So if it's 0 or less, I don't want to be able to scroll because then the whole thing is going to scroll too far over. So basically, I just need to check it against the dx value. A dx value, remember, is how much the player is trying to move at each iteration. It could be negative or positive, so I convert it to an absolute value, which makes it positive every time. So now, with this check, well, I'll have to run over to the end of the screen again, actually, which could take me a little while. I'll just skip all these dudes. I'm not going to bother killing any of them. I'll run to the very end to where I get to my exit, and if I've done this correctly, then it should stop scrolling and allow the player to just run all the way up to the end of the screen. And in fact, and there you go, it's worked. And I think I haven't even added in a stop for him, so I can probably walk. Yep, I can walk off the edge of the screen, and I won't be able to come back because he's just fallen off. I do want to fix that though, because that is a little bit of a bug. If I was to play around with my levels, for example, let's load in that level 1 for a second. If I was to just make a little tunnel for him in here, it's pretty handy having this, I can quickly edit stuff. If I was to run this code again and just run off to the left hand side, it's kind of rubbish to being able to do that, because not all of my levels are going to have this wall up and down on the right and left hand side. So to fix this is really easy. I mean, we just need to do all these same checks again, but just before I move the player. So just up here, I'll add a little section, and I'll say check if going off the edges of the screen. But I only want this to apply to the player. I don't want this to apply to the enemies. So again, I just do this check here. So I'll copy this up. So as long as it's the player that's doing this, then if he's going off the left-hand side, then it's self.rect.left plus dx, which is the movement amount. If that is less than 0, or if he's trying to go off the right-hand side, so his rectangle right plus dx is greater than the screen width, well, in both of those cases, stop his movement by just setting dx to 0. Now, if I run this again and I try to go through this tunnel, you'll notice he can't go through it anymore. So that's a pretty simple fix for that bug. But there's one more thing that's maybe not immediately obvious, and that is how these players interact, or sorry, what happens to the enemies when they reach a wall. At the moment, I've positioned them so that doesn't happen, but you may have a situation or a level where that does happen. So if I was to put, let's say there's an enemy over here, I'll just delete this stuff for now. I'll put an enemy in here, and then I'll put some walls around him. I'll do it like that. See if that works. So if I run over, yeah, so you notice what happens is when he gets to the end of it, he doesn't turn around. He just keeps kind of running into the wall. And in fact, I think I've spaced the walls just far enough apart that it doesn't take him too long. But if I get rid of these and put them closer together, then it's going to become a bit more obvious. So let's run that again. You see, he just keeps running into it. And that's because I haven't coded anything that tells them that when you run into a wall, you should do something. At the moment, all they're doing is checking for collision, but their movement left and right is controlled by a timer. So the only logic I want to add in is that when they do hit a wall, they just turn around and go the other way. So if I come back into my collision section, here I'm looking for collision in the X direction for the player. But what I can also do is do the same check, which is pretty much happening anyway. So all the enemies collide with boxes in the left and right direction, but I want them to turn around. So within this if statement, after I set dx to 0, I'll add a section that says if the AI has hit a wall, then make it turn around. So again, I can use that self.character type, and I can check now if it's an enemy instead of a player. So if the enemy has come in contact with the wall, then let's just flip their direction round. So multiply that by -1, and also reset their move counter. So the movement starts again, otherwise they're just going to continue where they were before. So now you can see he's just bouncing and he's just going between those two walls. So that's pretty much it for this tutorial. I've added in scrolling as well as background scrolling and fixed a few bugs. So if you found this useful, then please do leave a like. And if you want to stay up to date with these, then feel free to subscribe. Thanks for watching.